The discovery of a means to stop the human aging process would be a massive tragedy of commons that would eventually consume all of the resources on Earth, leading to a decrease in the quality of life of everyone who's continually living. We're going to model this in a way that we think is fair and leads to a good balance from this motion that is somewhat less concrete. And so what we're going to talk about is that it'll stop the aging process at like the point where you're 35. This doesn't mean that you will no longer get diseases of any sort. It simply means that your chance of getting that disease will not be increasing as time goes on. So the chance of you getting a disease is locked in as it would be for any healthy 35-year-old as you were at that point, right? You could still die from disease or injury or any of the other ways. It's not immortality, it's just not aging, right? We also think probably the way this would end up happening is someone would develop it, the rich would have it for a short amount of time, then eventually governments would seize it and spread it to everyone. We're going to talk about the world where this is in place and everyone's living to 35, how that affects the rest of humanity. If there are any questions with that or problems, please raise on a PLI. I'm going to talk to you about four things. I'm going to first talk to you about the economic impacts of putting this forward. Second of all, I'm going to talk about overpopulation and what will come out of that. Third, I'm going to talk about how this will increase local tragedies. And fourth, I'm going to talk about how this will stop social evolution in its track and put back the protection of rights. Danny's going to talk to you about why life without death has no meaning, and also the effects of this in both the temporal and spiritual realm. Right? But first, let's talk about the economic impacts. Right? We think there are two ways in which this will massively deflate economies across the world. The first is that it takes away a key incentive for everyone to put in extra effort in their job. So what do I mean by this? One of the reasons you go above and beyond your job description is that you hope that you'll be promoted when your boss eventually retires. But in this case, when bosses are not getting older and not looking to spend their golden years with their spouse or with their children, we think it's less likely that you see a promotion in your future and see the opportunity to move up the corporate ladder because your boss is planning to work for the next 3,000 years. At that point, everyone in the corporate structure is a lot less likely to put in the extra effort that makes corporations run and that makes us have profit and actual goods. This leads to a huge decrease in output per person and a lowering of the standards of the quality of life. The second way we see it hurts the economy is that we simply see no time pressure for the individuals in a need to excel. So we understand that there often is this feeling of, oh my God, I need to get a job, I need to support things, I only have so much time. And that can be stressful, and we recognize that. But the result of having those pressures on people, those time pressure, is an economy that works much better and produces many more goods for the rest of everyone else to excel and to exceed. So when you aggregate that effect, we have an economy that works better and takes everyone into account. Go ahead.
Most people in these sorts of jobs are actually trying to work to be the best that they possibly can. They don't get into this all the time so that they can give people money in their future. There's still an incentive to work insofar as you love what you do.
Right. Some people love their profession, and the other 99% of us do it for a paycheck and the chance that we might get recognition. We understand there are mixed motives in why you pursue a job. One of them is often the chance of promotion, whether that's for recognition or for an increased salary, and this takes away that motivation and therefore limits people's desire to work more, right? Second, let's talk about overpopulation, because we think this inevitably leads to massive starvation. Note that the countries that have the highest population growth usually have pretty low output per person. So you're looking at countries like India and Nigeria. And why is this? Because when you have a certain amount of output, right, this is when you have a certain amount of output, you can support a basic number of people. There's only so much agriculture at any point in time, so much food that you can produce to support everyone on Earth. And so you have many checks as to why we never reach that point where you've actually reached famine. There are checks such as preventive checks like birth control and people delaying marriage. We think these might increase and might for a while stop us from reaching that point of famine. But ultimately, when no one is dying of old age or from getting diseases that are directly correlated with old age, we think eventually you're going to reach a point where the number of people on Earth is doubling at a massive rate. You can look at the United States back in colonial periods where the rate of growth was that the population was doubling every 25 years. Because there were none of these preventive checks. There was totally out there you could grow and no one was dying at that rate. We think this level of growth is one that cannot be sustained over time. That when people are not dying off because of age, they're going to eventually overpopulate to the point that we can't support based on agriculture, which means people start dying of starvation, which we still haven't found a cure for. At that point, that's a much worse way for people to go, where the poor and those that don't have access to food are always the ones that are being hurt, instead of everyone being hurt by old age across the board. We think it's more arbitrary and more pernicious for a family to watch their children starve than it is to watch their grandparent peacefully pass away because of old age. Third, let's talk about how this makes local tragedies more likely. Notice that certain jobs place a premium on the fact that there is a risk to your life. So if you become a firefighter or a Secret Service person or in the SWAT team or a police officer, you get a little bit extra salary because you're potentially sacrificing years of your life. We think the amount that you will need to pay people to compensate them when they know they can live indefinitely because of old age will be much higher than it is now. Sacrificing 5,000 years versus 30 years is a big difference for people to take into account. In certain cases, the government will be able to still pay that premium. So we'll probably still be able to pay for the Secret Service or for like very specialized things where the federal government goes in. But note that most firefighters in America are volunteer firefighters. And most of these local people that protect tragedies all the time are those that require them to be sacrificing, in this case, knowing that their life is at risk. Now, some, we admit, will probably still take on the job because of the respect that comes with it. We say that it will not totally go away. But the number of people willing to take this job will certainly decrease, which means more death in fires, more deaths from shooting, and all of those things that lower quality of life.
Alex, for this argument to mean anything, you're actually assuming volunteer firefighters calculate that, oh, I don't want to sacrifice 200 years, but 35 years, that's totally cool. I'm willing to give that
Yeah,
up.
perhaps you're not making a distinction between 20 and 30, but you're certainly going to make the distinction between 20 and 5,000. Like the second this is passed and people start to contemplate the fact that they could live forever if they never risk their life, we see a shift in how people make that calculation going forward. Lastly, why do we think this stops social evolution in its tracks? There are 3 reasons. First, we think often those that are already entrenched and in power are the most conservative, those that are against gay rights, against women's rights, and we're like kind of waiting for them to die in some cases so we can pass good policies. Now they won't, right? Sorry, it's true. Second of all, right, as you age more, you tend to become more set in your ways and more believing in conservative causes. So we see a correlation between aging and being more sure of what you've already believed in, being less open to new experiences, and less open to expand rights and therefore vote in liberal ways. As people are aging even longer, we see this effect will encourage more and more people to lead towards conservative tendencies. Now, am I saying we're going back to slavery? No. But I'm saying that we are going to have more people always consistently voting conservatively, and this means that it will be less likely that people who are gay, or people who are women, or people who are anything besides the majority party in that country will have their rights respected by a popular vote. Because of all of these problems that will occur, we are very, very proud to say this is a curse to humanity.
I thank the Speaker for his speech, and to in case for the opposition, House recognizes the Leader of Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just going to quickly deal with what's kind of a side proposition before getting into my constructive arguments. First, he talks about the economic impacts, right? He's like, look, there's going to be no extra efforts because no one is going to retire before you, so you're just going to stop doing the meaningless slog of daily labor. There's a couple of 3 responses to this. First, job switches happen, right? Like actually, as our lifetimes have increased in today's world compared to previous generations, we switch jobs more because we tend to think of them less as careers. That doesn't mean we work less at them. It just means that we want to be very good at something and then move to other things. We think that that's actually a good thing, right? Because it means that people can actually explore their passions over a long period of time. We think that that's actually a good thing. Second, the response is that people can do everything, right? Where previously they would have to have committed to something for a lifetime because they are saddled with student debt from the first degree that they've done, they no longer have to take these considerations into account. We think that that's actually a good thing. They tell you that there's no need to excel. We tell you you can still die of starvation if you don't get an income, right? So like that's your reason to excel. You're still going to want money for other needs, like whether they're basic or whether you want more money for other things. And finally, he tells you that in response to Rent's POI that people still work for paychecks. We think that that's no longer true on our side of the house. We think that people can actually explore their passions when they're not saddled by the need to immediately have a family and support that family and deal with all of the debt that they have from a house, from a mortgage, from student debt. We actually think that we give people more freedom on our side of the house, and that's going to be a running theme. Second, he talks to you about overpopulation and starvation, right? So first of all, we can have government policies that limit some sorts of these things. We can have incentives. These are probably good. We can teach people about birth control. That's good. Second, our current problems with overpopulation tend to be about the fact that we're not living sustainably, right? Like we could fit the entire human population into Texas if we lived with the density of Hong Kong. We don't. That's the reason why overpopulation is an issue in the first place, and we think that when the need arises, we can trust people to live more sustainably, and the government can help us with doing this. Thirdly, our great minds are going to live forever. Do you really think we're not going to have a solution to some of these things if scientists like Newton can get to live for hundreds of years and continue to do their research? And fourth, the idea of kids to most people is like, I'm going to die. I need a legacy on this planet. They're going to be less enchanted with the idea of having kids right away, of having more kids, because they will no longer feel the need to necessarily leave this legacy if they think that, hell, my life is immortal. Yes?
50% of pregnancies in America are unplanned. The rates are even higher elsewhere. Do you really think that we're simply going to have
Yes,
a huge
okay.
reduction in kids
Yes,
because people say I'll live
I
forever?
get your point. I don't think that governments are as ineffective as you suggest that they are. We think that government policies can be put into place. We've already done something radical, which is discover a cure for the aging process, and we think that the only solution to overpopulation is not limiting this aging process. We think we have other solutions. Third, you talk about local tragedies, right? You say that there are risks to your lives from jobs, that people won't be compensated enough. First of all, if we buy our arguments about overpopulation, we're going to have an increased tax base, so we can actually pay for these things, right? So, no. Second, though, we think that you're going to have increased economic productivity when people are working at these jobs that they want to do and working very hard at them because hopefully they're now passionate about them, right? And we think that the idea of like we're going to have to pay firefighters and police officers more is like given that they try to rescue people and extend their lives is like a dumb argument in the round of in the context of a round about whether or not we should have halt the aging process. Fourth, he tells us that we entrench conservatism, right? First of all, we think that it's illegitimate to believe in killing people off because we don't agree with their views, right? We think that that's just kind of bad. But second, we think that these people don't change their minds because they're like, look, we're gonna die, right? I have believed in this for longer than most of these whippersnappers were alive. I don't need to change my mind. But if you're in the context of a situation where it's like, look, I could live forever. The world is evolving around me, and I need to change my mind to fit in the new economy, in the new social politics, that people will have more of a motivation to stay engaged, to consider new ideas, and move on with their lives. All right, moving on to my constructive. First, this gives you freedom, and we think that that's ultimately one of the biggest reasons that life is meaningful to you. So it's a little bit of rebuttal to what we're going to see from the second speaker. Yes?
So can you explain why freedom is particularly meaningful to people, or what metric you have for people evaluating the meaning of their own lives?
Okay. We think that when people no longer feel saddled to the idea of I'm going to die and you need to accomplish this thing in order to feed my family and look at these mundane considerations, that they're actually saddled, right? They're living their lives on the basis of external constraints. Not all of those go away on our side of the house, right? Some of these still exist because you're still going to die. But we think that the fact that you might still die is motivation to move on, but now or to motivation to continue to work hard and do things that you're passionate about, but now that's no longer arbitrarily stopped by a major external consideration of an aging process, right? The idea that you will never be able to continue to do the things that you did at 35, that you will never be able to move on and continue to pursue your passions and maybe become both an expert pianist and an expert actress and an expert mathematician. That's now available to you in your life to have multiple passions that you can pursue freely. Finally, though, right, it's also a choice about whether or not life is meaningful to you at a certain point, because you're not obligated to pursue in this lack of an aging process. And you can also take your own life if you think that at this point your life is no longer meaningful. We think that that agency over your life that is unimpeded by external constraints is what makes that life meaningful to you. Second, we think there are massive societal benefits contrary to what side first proposition brings you, right? They tell you that, our great minds are going to live forever, right? So we think that in a world where Newton mentors Hawking, that's going to be an exciting and a wonderful world for scientific discoveries. We think that that may, in fact, end a lot of the problems that we've seen as fundamental to humanity and may actually make us happier, better, more moral citizens of the world. We think that the emotional strains of having loved ones die also should not be underrated. We think it's a massive benefit to society that you no longer have to watch your grandfather waste away over the years, and that you can instead cherish your life with your loved ones and not hope that you die before they do. That's not a meaningful life. Thirdly, and Brent's going to elaborate more on this, people can opt out under our system, right? And we think that that speaks again to the choices that you have. You don't have to use the technology that you receive. For these reasons, Mr. Speaker, we stand.
I thank the Speaker for her speech, and to continue the case for the government, the House recognises the Deputy Prime Minister.
We're proud to say one thing will be certain in the next world: taxes. And that might be a good thing, but we think that when debt isn't certain, there are some negatives. Mainly, there are negatives to the way we go ahead and live our lives, the way we derive meaning from our lives, both in the temporal world and in the spiritual world. But before I get that, specific areas of rebuttal. So first, this notion that we can actually trust people to live sustainably, that we're gonna basically live in Hong Kong, but it's gonna be the size of Texas and all will be good. So first, we'd say that like people don't want to live sustainably, right? Most people in the United States want to continue having the lives they've grown accustomed to. Now, when you live forever, what you're going to do is try and force the way of lifestyle that you grew up with so you reach age 35 onto others. We think if Walt Whitman were around today, he would probably try and force other people to live like agrarian Republican farmers because that's what he believes is best. So you would have all these like colonialists trying to force that method of life onto other people. We don't think people are going to like make sacrifices. They're going to want to enjoy life for as long as possible, which means like living unsustainably, but they're going to do it for 5,000 years. So we're going to consume the earth resources pretty quickly. Then she's like, oh, people won't really have kids, but procreation is the result of like a basic human sex drive that doesn't derive just from the fact we're going to die. Like people will want children because they get joy out of having children. They're just going to have lots of it because like you're going to get bored and be like, well, I raised kids, I'm going to have some more. Then we think that like, she said this gives you a freedom, right? We think freedom from death means that you don't actually take choices in life. Because it's the idea that you're eventually going to die that drives us to take choices that would otherwise be interesting. So when Alex offers the analogy of like being a firefighter, knowing that I'm not going to live forever means I should do something with my life, derive meaning from it. We think in a world in which you do live forever, you're less likely to take actions that actually derive you meaning. Then she says like, oh, there are all these social benefits from great minds living forever. So first we'd say like there's a limit to what like an expert can actually learn. We think like even if Newton was still around, eventually there would be like a limit to his human intelligence, at which point he's not actually making like a lot of benefits. But second, we'd say like people are often resistant to new ideas. If like Newton were still like mentoring other physics, we would only have Newtonian physics and we would never move past that because Newton would be like, well, I have a vested interest in maintaining what I believe to be the correct conception of physics. But third, that argument cuts the other way, which is like we have lots of bigots and racists around to mentor other bigots and racists. Like I don't want Stalin and Hitler being like the mentor to Pol Pot and Kim Jong-il. We think that's far worse. And then finally, like she says people can opt out of the system. But we think that's incredibly problematic. Why? Because what it does is create a twofold world, where at one side, we have an entire economy and structure of society where people basically live for 5,000 years, compared to a world where people live for 80 years. Now, how are people who live for 80 years supposed to compete in an economic system where people live forever, where they make human capital investment decisions off of the notion they live forever, where they're going to die at 80 and they're only going to have one set of kids, but their boss is going to live forever and doesn't understand why he won't work like a 100-hour week to get a project in. We think it actually forces people into the system because there's no way they can compete. There isn't actually freedom of choice. It's coercive. Everyone will be forced to choose the other system, and those few who don't will have a far worse life. But okay, sure.
You say that people aren't going to be able to make meaningful choices because people make choices because of the fact that they will die. This is the absolute like presence of no free will because you are making choices on the basis of death. You don't actually make choices in your own interest because you are eventually going to die. That's like the definition of non.
So I think you make choices in your own interest because you know that you'll eventually going to die. So you want to take choices that you are interested in taking, things that you will enjoy because you know you're not going to be around to enjoy things forever. I think like we've had free will because we've had death forever. Like, I don't think this is an issue. But okay, onto my own substantive matter. I actually think it's death that life springs from. So Epicurean thought basically is the idea that you should enjoy and maximize your enjoyment of life because it's finite. And in the end, that enjoyment is what creates utility. In the Middle Ages, the maxim, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die, was propagated. We think it's knowing that death is coming is what causes us to go ahead and do things and enjoy our life. We think the theme of death has been represented constantly with Western and Eastern literature. It makes things darker, but we also think it makes our brighter moments brighter. And this is for a few reasons.
First, the death or the fear of death forces us to make choices. And we think this choice is what moves life and humanity as a whole forward. We think without the pressure of time to actually make choices, we're sort of gripped into an endless inertia, where we ask ourselves, what's the rush? Why decide whether or not I want to go to college? Why make a difficult decision? Delay, 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 because eventually, I'm never going to have to die. We also think that the fact that life is finite is what makes us take risks. It means we should go ahead and enjoy things. So the decision to, go ahead and explore the world, or go rock climbing, or visit a dangerous place, is in some ways premised on the notion that, guess what? I'm not going to live forever. I'm going to die at 80, so I might as well do something now in my youth, right? Our parents always tell us, cherish your youth, take on new experiences. We think when we don't die, when we live for 5,000 years, we're actually going to be gripped by a certain paranoia, where we weigh this vague sense of living forever against the possible risk, but enjoyment now. We think that's a difficult calculus to make. People will end up passing up the enjoyment in favor of a bland existence. But second, we think that knowing something is once in a lifetime causes us to cherish things more. So things like birth of a child or a grandchild or a solar eclipse, when they are truly once in a lifetime, means that you cherish it more. We think the more times we experience something, the less we actually enjoy it. We think by the time your 30th child is born, you're going to love them a little bit less. And my proof here is look at how people love middle children. They don't care for them very much. We think a world without love is far worse. And third, we think people will actually outgrow love. Call me a hopeless romantic, but I can't really understand being married to the same person for 3,000 years. We think we're getting more divorce here. We think we're getting bitter emotional splits, and we think that's going to make people less happy. But four, we think when people do finally die, it's going to be far worse, because death will become more of a shock. Yes, people are going to die because statistically speaking, eventually you will be hit by a car, right? But that will be such a sudden shock, you won't know how to deal with it because you're I thought my debate partner Alex was going to live to be 5,000. We think the emotional strain here is going to be way, way worse. Finally, on the spiritual realm. We believe that the basic premise that there is an afterlife in which you'll be reunited with the Creator and your loved ones is incredibly powerful and incredibly motivating. We think it has guided human thought, human emotion, and in many ways, how we interact with other people. We think a world in which there isn't the notion of an afterlife because we're going to live for so long, it ends up compromising something essential to religion. We think without this special meaning, a lot of people's lives lose value in a way that is difficult to evaluate. So what have I told you in my speech here today? Essentially, we derive meaning out of death because it forces us to make choices. It causes us to cherish moments because they are once in a lifetime. It causes us to love someone in a way that we are capable and for a time span in which we can cherish them. And finally, it means we evaluate and value those around us more because we know they won't be there forever. For these reasons, we propose.
I thank the Speaker for his speech, and to continue the case for the opposition, the House recognises the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The greatest tyranny, I think, in existence is the inevitability of death. The idea that no matter what you do, no matter what happens, you will age, you will wrinkle, and you will die, and everyone you know and love around you will be gone, and you might not have anything to do in a future afterlife that First Gov would like to assure you might actually be there. I think that insofar as this is the case, where death frames your decisions, as First Gov would lead you to believe, that these lives are far more fractured, they are far worse off, I think they are terrible. I think that poverty is far worse in a world where you cannot actually have the time to come out of this. Being born into an impoverished situation is far more binding and far more shackling when you do not have the entire 5,000 years, as they say, to try and overcome that. When you only have the ability of 100 years to try and overcome also other people who were born in rich situations. This is a huge tyranny because you are not at parity with these people, and you will probably die in a situation where you were never given an equal choice. At our side of the House, people at least have a longer time to try to actively get out of this situation. I think that, frankly, almost all of First Gov's stuff about overpopulation and jobs is ridiculous, and I'm going to deal with it now. Let's talk about, first of all, overpopulation and also this idea of people not doing jobs. First of all, with the idea of overpopulation. I do not necessarily think, and I do not think they have given you links to believe that this will necessarily lead to more people being on this planet in and of itself. We think that, as we have said, that even if you have a sex drive, not everyone, they say 50% of pregnancies are unplanned, that leaves another entire 50% of people who are actually looking to have children. In a life where you do not need to have children to continue your legacy, where you do not necessarily need to do this except for maybe in 2,000 years, I think that less children are born because people don't want to do that. I also think that Bhuvana is quite right in telling you that we have other ways that we are able to accomplish trying to ensure that overpopulation isn't a problem. First of all, through government policies like ensuring that birth control is given to these areas, and second of all, by actually trying to have incentives for people not to have children. The idea that we would have people die as an alternative to these types of birth control as a better solution, I think is offensive and frankly ridiculous. I don't think that killing these people off because they might overpopulate in the future is necessarily a good outcome in any possible world. But insofar as people aren't going to do the sorts of jobs that they talk about, that there won't be incentives for people to commit to their work or to do risky sorts of work, I have a few responses. First of all, and I'll take you in a second, the idea that people aren't going to want to be promoted because necessarily the oldest people in society will be at an advantage. I'd suggest to you that you have an entire life to try and work as hard as you can to catch up with those people, and I think that for a period of time, a lot of people who are older are going to move on to other things. As Bhuvana has told you, in a lifetime like now, where people are living far longer, people switch professions because frankly, you are not actually content with what you are doing. I think this gives plenty of people opportunities that frankly they don't deal with very quickly.
Sure, so insofar as you're going to live to be 5,000 years old, don't you think having a few dozen kids is a good way to occupy that time?
So I think that there are, people will find, people have other ways to occupy this time. And I think that when they realize that they're going to have to live with the consequences of a world 5,000 years in the future that is massively overpopulated, maybe they don't have tons of children, right? I think that one of the reasons that people make decisions that are so destructive to future generations is because they don't think they have to deal with the consequences of those decisions, right? One of the reasons that people are so willing to pollute the environment is because they don't think that in 100 years they're going to have to care about the lakes and the smog and all of these sorts of things. At the point where you have to care about overpopulation, where people might starve, people that you love in the future, I think you have an incentive to have this change. No, not right now. I also would suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, that people will have incentives to do the jobs that they love because I think that people want to have the freedom to do the different things that are important in society, and I think that you can still pay people to take these sorts of risks because people will find that work meaningful enough that they will indeed do it. But I want to deal with what I think is the more important part of their extension, of their constructive material, which is this idea of the meaning of life. And basically what they suggest to you is that you can only cherish things insofar as you have the specter of death looming over you. And that you can only actually make the decisions that you make when death is going to come are necessarily better. I think this is totally out of line and totally not the case. First of all, I'd suggest to you that you only make decisions so that you can actually sustain in this life and ensure that the people around you are better off. I think that in a longer life, you have the ability to do more of what actually makes you happy, what pleases you, and I think that is far more beneficial. I can become a master pianist and I can become an actor in the same lifetime. I do not have to be bound by one of these things. If I make a mistake like I did and go into poli-sci instead of engineering, I am no longer bound with that mistake for the rest of my lifetime because I don't have the rest of my life to try and ameliorate that. Mistakes on their side of the house cripple you for your entire life. The idea that you would make a mistake that would necessarily impact your life, I think is much worse when you don't have the time to overcome that. If I make the mistake of failing in university, I can try and overcome that by working for 50 years, going back and actually having some period in my own life. Go ahead.
The inverse of that is when you succeed, it just doesn't have that same meaning to you because you haven't sacrificed or lost anything for the successes which you get.
So I'd say a few things. First of all, I say that you end up finding meaning in far different ways, and you will actually look for different alternatives to find this meaning. But second of all, I think that you have control over when you die, right? This is the most important thing on our side of the house. On their side of the house, you are shackled by two things. You're shackled, first of all, by the chance of accidental death, which we will agree is also a problem on our side of the house, but also the inevitability of aging. I'd suggest to you when the inevitability of aging goes away, Mr. Speaker, you have the ability to actually decide when you want to end your life and how to find meaning within that life. I think that when you stop enjoying things and when this life is no longer valuable to you, you can choose the time when you want to end it, when you want to leave this world, and when you think that is most valuable. On their side of the house, nature decides this, and you have no ability to control that at all, and you have to be taken away from your loved ones. I think that's terrible. I want to finish on this idea of why it's terrible to watch those around you suffer and die in these scenarios. I think that First Government doesn't even deal with this point in any meaningful way. I want you to think about if you had a loved one, if you had someone that you care deeply about, a grandfather, a sister, a mother, that passed away after a long period of time because of age, what they suggest to you is that this isn't really that much of a harm. I suggest to you that watching one of these people grow old and get Alzheimer's and become no longer the person that they once were, watching them die, watching them leave you when you've loved them so deeply and so passionately for all this time, is one of the most traumatic experiences anyone could ever endure. I suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, that when this happens, you are worse off. And I say you're never prepared for an old father or an old mother to die. Anyone who is callous, and I don't think is actually dealing with the reality of these situations. When your father dies, you feel an emptiness that can never ever be replaced. And if we can even make that less likely on our side of the house, we have to win, because love perseveres, and we have more of these people in existence. We're very grateful.
I thank the Speaker for his speech, and to continue the case of the government, the House recognises the Member of Government.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, one day the inevitable claws of age will catch up with me. My beautiful appearance will start to decay. I will look older and older, and ultimately I will die. There are cases that when I do start to look older, I'll be judged more fairly on the things I say and the things I do, although obviously, with this I'm accepting, obviously. And that with the end of my death, with the possibility of death, my life, although fleeting, is given more meaning. So let's talk about two things. Firstly, about perceptions of age, why they're important and why we think we lose them on opposition, and what the inequalities that leads to. And secondly, the value of life that can only come from the possibility of death. Before that, I'm going to have 5 responses to things that came out of opening opposition. Firstly, they claim that when we get geniuses who live forever, we ultimately get better scientific development. As opening opposition pointed out, they'll probably stunt their growth at some stage. But I think it's also worth pointing out that many of the most radical scientific changes come from sources that are broadly external to the scientific community. They're more based on a sort of a paradigm shift idea of a new mind, somebody who looks at something in a completely different way and takes something in an entirely new direction. We think they actually stifle that, because you're going to have such reverence of the old heroes, with such reverence of the Newton that the leader of the opposition has, which is never going to be able to get past a Newtonian way of thinking. I don't think you can really get a new way of thinking when you always have to revere that person. Secondly, they told us that there's going to be on their side some increase in the amount of life that people were having. That isn't probably true. What is probably true is who will experience it. The only people who are going to experience that increase in life are the people currently alive. They're not the new people who could potentially come about. Because ultimately, unless there is massive overpopulation, their case on this is that there's just going to be fewer new people, basically. But in order for that to work as a response, they have to claim for some reason why it's actually more valuable for us, people alive at the moment, to have those experiences than it is for people who aren't yet alive. They've given literally no reason as to why that's the case, and in fact we're going to give multiple reasons as to why it's actually harmful. Thirdly, they told us that the environment is going to improve because people are going to bear the costs ultimately. The reason people contribute to environmental damage is not the fact that they don't believe they'll have to bear the costs, given most projections say that significant harm's kicked in by 2050 and most of us are going to live another 37 years. The actual reason is they think that their own marginal contribution is so insignificant that they might as well do it, given that everyone else is doing it. That's the reason people continue to damage the environment. Fourthly, on pregnancy, they said that people would stop doing it in some way because they don't want to have their own progeny or legacy living on Earth, because they live. There are many reasons why people have children. Some people just enjoy nurturing things. Lots of people own pets and see children as a far more serious and significant extension of that. But the value of bringing up a life is in some way meaningful to somebody, not just because it happens to be you or come from you, but because that is in fact something that they enjoy. That's why many people do things like adoption. Lastly, in this regards to the harms of death, they said that death's very harmful and it's really upsetting. Only government told you though that a lot of the harms come from the fact that it's a shock. That's made far more of a shock when it's in opposition's world, and they probably should have responded to that when they were talking about it. No, thank you. Now, perceptions and the way in which they harm inequality. We think ultimately perceptions are very harmful to people in the way in which they're perceived. When people are young, they tend to be judged on the basis of their looks. And they tend to form strong societal expectations as to the manner in which they look, as to whether they, stay in shape, whether they dress appropriately, how well they present their hair, and like the fact that they shave every day, or reasonably often anyway. We think ultimately there's an expectation that when you are young, you'll work on that experience. When you're old, that level of discrimination goes away. It's natural to expect some amount of physical decay, and so people stop expecting that of people, and they start to judge them on a more realistic basis. They start to judge them on an honest basis. This is great. It means that people are liberated from the perceptions of their appearance and allow them to be appreciated properly for the things that they're good at. They allow people to sort of properly judge them on their abilities. And, this is why sort of old dinosaurs of the debate community can lose a bit of their hair and still manage to win a lot of tournaments in the UK. This isn't a joke about Jack Watson, by the way. But ultimately, when there is a push to be judged on the basis of the abilities, there's a comparison between these two sides. On opposition's world, there's always an expectation you'll continue to look a fresh-faced 35, and you'll continue to always present yourself excellently. On our side of the house, that expectation goes away. We think this is especially problematic for women as a group. We think it's true that when you're young, the extent to which you're judged on the appearance overwhelms all other factors. It makes it very difficult to judge you on the basis of anything else in your life. And so ultimately, you are just perceived on that single and unique axis of identity. Ultimately, then it becomes very difficult to incorporate other ideas. Now, we admit that there's always going to be some situations in which there is a pressure towards physical appearance, somewhere like Hollywood. But ultimately, we think generally the aging process is good. In businesses, in politics, in companies where people can now be perceived for the people they are and for how good they are only.
Sudden death happens on both sides and is equally traumatic. In the debate at hand, however, we've cut out one source of death that can be long drawn out.
The thing is, it isn't equally traumatic, because on their side they don't always accept, if it's just happening once in 5,000 years, that's a real shock. If it happens once in every 80, that's not. And on their side, they don't have aging, so it is always going to be a shock. It's going to be like a piano fell on me in somewhere. That's a bit of a shock. On this side, it's like he was 85, it was his time. I think that's fine. So, in terms of values, we think that ultimately the value of experience comes from the fact that it is itself finite. Something like this tournament is more enjoyable when I know that it's unlikely I'm going to come back, and so Mary enjoys it less than I do. Ultimately, you get diminishing returns from many things. You get less enjoyment as you go on, because you get jaded and there are constantly similar experiences. When you hear a great piece of music, whether that's Beethoven's Ninth or Aqua's Barbie Girl, the second time you hear it, you just enjoy a bit less, and ultimately you overplay it and you don't want to hear it anymore, or the first time you hear it, depending on which song it is. We were told that mistakes were really harmful. No, the fact that you're able to make mistakes, the fact that you have to make sacrifices for your choices, is what gives those choices meaning. Without that, how can you properly weigh up the value of that choice? How can you care about what it means? That choice loses its meaning. It loses what you delineate to be important to yourself by the virtue of what you're willing to give up to get it. Because you no longer have to give anything up to get it at all. It means it takes it away from this. They told us that free will operates as a constraint on this. But there are always going to be some constraints. We're not that concerned with what those constraints are. We're questioning the manner in which those constraints operate on the meaning to which you ascribe an act. Ultimately, enjoyment of an act is not about the quality of an act. It's about the perception of the meaning of that act. When you do get this repetition, and when those acts don't appear like they're finite things, you lose the meaning of those acts, and you lose the ability to perceive that act as a unique and descriptor of who you are. Their response to this is that you should kill yourself when you get bored. But the point isn't that you eventually get bored. The point is that it never gets any meaning, because you've never had the idea of giving something up. And if they want to talk about bleak endings, I think the idea that I'm bored of everything, I now have to shoot myself, is the bleakest ending of all that any side of this debate can possibly offer. Ultimately, the only value you can derive from experiences is that which you give up to get other things. And furthermore, the perceptions of getting older mean that you're able to engage in experiences with far more meaning. We're very happy to stand on top.
I thank the speaker for his speech, and to continue the case for the opposition, the House recognises the opposition member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin responding to the extension we just heard from James, then a few points of clarification from the front half, and a couple points of extension. First, the extension we get from James. People stop, or businesses, discriminatory factors in the world, stop expecting you to be young as you get old. Well, on our side of the house, no one gets old, so you stop discriminating on that basis. Instead of, does this guy look like a CEO, as code for, does he look like he's 60, you actually evaluate on the merits of that person's performance in the workplace. I think it's enormously valuable, you need better companies as a result. The second plank of the extension that he tells you is that you get diminishing returns from doing things. Presumably what he says is that Jack derives less meaning from going returns, so you've been going forever. I suggest that's not true because he keeps going, but furthermore, like Brent and I, you can stay an undergrad forever, and you still derive enjoyment from debate tournaments. Why? Not because you know you'll never be able to go back, but because you enjoy putting in the time and the effort and the energy into doing things that you love, into doing things that you enjoy. You have an unlimited ability to do that on our side of the house that you do not have on theirs. I suggest that makes living forever incredibly beneficial. A few points of extension from front half. First proposition says, we will run out of resources and we will all starve to death. So apparently we live in a world where we can invent a pill that stops people from aging, but we cannot invent a pill that stops people from being hungry, or we cannot even come up with new means of agricultural production that allow us to grow more food, just as we have done every decade or every century for the entirety of human existence. I suggest you will find a way to solve that resource problem. Their response to this is, well, no, because most people want to live like Americans do. No, most Americans want to live like Americans do. Where resources are actually constrained, like in Hong Kong, like in Shanghai, like in metropolitan cities all over the world, they manage to get by in a far less resource-intensive way, and it's exactly what's going to happen on our side of the house. Lastly, absurdly, they say there's not going to be enough jobs because the economy will not expand to meet the needs of the burgeoning population. This flies in the face of basic economics. I don't think it's accurate. Second claim they make is about social factors. They say old people don't like gays and society will become more conservative. First of all, this assumes without justification that conservatism is bad. I know we're all liberal debaters and we like to think that, but they never justified that claim. Secondly, I think old people dislike gays, dislike any minority group they are uncomfortable with, because it is seen as unusual to them, because they have not lived with that social reality for a long time. I suggest if they know they're going to have to live with their gay neighbor for the next 300 years, they might become more accepting. Then I'll take you in a second. Then we hear that people will all have like 30 kids, and therefore it'll be some kind of strain. So first of all, I think vasectomy is going to become very, very popular. Why? Because it's enormously expensive to have kids. It's not something you just choose to do forever. There are huge social factors in wanting to leave a legacy. The first opposition is already articulated, start to diminish and go away. I think the marginal benefit to having 30 kids is certainly far less than having 1 or 2, which I think people will rationally decide to do.
Hundreds of millions of people are currently starving on Earth. Is your solution in this
Because of
debate to
deplorable
the
economic-
fact that seniors are going to not die simply fiating a magic pill that will solve all hunger?
People are starving in the status quo because of deplorable economic policies in this country and the European Union that pay people not to grow food or cause it to be burned or dumped into the developing world at non-prices. I suggest to you that if you fix those problems, you'd fix a lot of the starvation in the world. You would also have, as we heard from first opposition, better academic advancement in the field of scientific research, so you're likely to be able to grow better food. Lastly, we hear from that side of the house, and this kind of does tie into the extension material that James provides you, kind of more an argument based around knowledge and philosophy. They say that people will entrench their academic pursuits, and as such you'll be unable to move on. People will worship Newton to such an extent that you can never challenge any of his views. Mr. Speaker, this flies in the face of how academia actually works. People make their names by challenging established academics with strong evidence, with new research. That's how academia actually happens. We hear from the Deputy Prime Minister that people will get lazy and idle. So first of all, you still need to have a job or you'll be broke. So I suggest people will not be totally idle. But secondly, people don't even want to live that way. No one wants to live an idle existence. You want to live lives of meaning. I suggest you are more able to do that on our side of the house because you are able to pursue, for instance, as First Opposition says, multiple courses, multiple different careers over the course of your life because you're able to do things that derive enormous satisfaction to you personally. Lastly, under this, we hear from side government that there is a shock of people dying. It will be so much worse when the alternative was immortality. In order for this to be true, Mr. Speaker, it would require individuals to effectively discount the future possibilities of 2,000 years.
People do not accurately discount the possibilities of what they're going to eat for lunch next week. I suggest to you it's impossible to think that the difference between 75 years later that Alex might die, or 150 years later, or 250 years later that he might die, is going to be an effective calculation that is made by broad swathes of society. I suggest to you that is simply unbelievable. No thank you. So, I will reference lots of my refutation in my extension material because I've already talked about a lot of it. Let's talk about a few things. First of all, let's talk about the societal expectations, societal effects of this motion. We're experiencing a bit of a demographic problem in the West, especially in Japan, and in lots of other countries right now. There are huge segments of the population that are unproductive and require support from the rest of society. At the point where the only demographic in your society that requires support are children, and there is a hugely expanding demographic that is of working age, you take far less out of the economy to support unproductive individuals. I suggest to you that enhances economic growth and lowers the drain of those individuals on society. Furthermore, I think you actually do change the political incentives to fix climate change. It might seem like to an individual in the West that it's not worth the marginal cost, but when those costs become more acute down the line and they know that in 2050 they will have to deal with the day of reckoning anyway, I suggest they become somewhat more likely to pursue those kinds of policies. But lastly, let's talk about the effect this has on individual people. Because first opposition has effectively told you why dying of Alzheimer's is absolutely terrible. But I think the fear of dying of Alzheimer's is especially bad for individuals. There is nothing worse than knowing that your body is going to decay on you, knowing that your body is going to desert you, and knowing there is nothing you can do to stop it. The crime, Mr. Speaker, of murder is a crime because it denies individuals the ability to live full and meaningful lives. The harm of murder is that you go away and you stop being able to live. I don't think it's any less deplorable when nature does it, and if we could stop it from happening, I suggest to you that we should. I think that individuals lose the ability to live meaningful, free, and happy lives, free of biological coercion. If we can stop nature from murdering people, we should, we can, we're proud to do so. Thank you very much.
I thank the Speaker for his speech, and to conclude the case for the government, the House recognises the government's witness.
Judgments made based on individual appearance and individual beauty are judgments which to some degree are made throughout our lives irrespective of what age we are at. But they are most pernicious and most commonly made when we look young. That's when there are the strongest expectations of beauty. That's when the strongest expectations that you ultimately form into a perfect ideal, and one which is so harmful for individuals because they are not judged on the quality of their character, but a set of abstract and socially conditioned beliefs of what you should be. That is what is stopped when you end. That is what is perpetuated when you don't end the aging process. I want to talk about three things about speech. First, I want to talk about appearance. Secondly, I want to talk about human life. Thirdly, I want to talk about economic conditions and all the material opening government gives you. Firstly, though, 3 points of response to the substantive material we have on the previous speaker. 1, demographic problems. By and large, it is very clear what Western countries should do to deal with demographic problems. The answer is what Germany does in terms of immigration and guest worker programs. We believe that is probably a good solution for the majority of countries to do, because that is something which does give the opportunities opening opposition wanted. We're more than happy to say that is a much better solution than allowing people to live forever. Secondly, climate change. They say there's more likely you will now do something about climate change. In the first place, as James tells you, by and large we know we still face the factors and the consequences of climate change, but we don't do anything about it. They don't respond to that. But more importantly, we think one of the reasons for that is individuals will strongly discount the future. I see no reason why they won't still do that, even though they are going to live longer, even though they are going to live longer. And thirdly, we still think the marginal arguments matter. That for any single individual, there is no rational reason not to have more children or to not pollute as much, so they will still continue to do that. They give you no reason why that isn't the case. The third thing he says, probably the most interesting thing, he says, let's end biological coercion. But the reason why I think death is bad, and the reason they give you death is bad, is because it would harm you. But bear in mind, everything we've told you on the side of the government thus far is that without death, you have less meaningful lives. You have lives which have less value. Ask yourself why, intuitively, we believe death is bad. Ask yourself why we generally think the death of a 12-year-old is much worse than that of an 85-year-old. It's because the experiences you have and the experiences you have lost are much worse when you were 12 than when you were 85. What is the point of that? The reason we find life to be valuable and death to be bad is because the experiences which you accrue. If those are less good because there is no death, or death is far less probable, that is an argument for their side. So let's first talk about appearance. I think the previous speaker misunderstood what James was talking about, where he talks about the way in which individuals make judgments under the status quo. When you're young, there are certain social expectations for the way you should look. You're meant to look particular ways. You're meant to be particularly physically attractive. You're meant to spend hours, for instance, with makeup or going to the gym. Why is that particularly true when you're young and not necessarily true when you're 30, when you're 40, or when you're 50? Partly because the biological process means those kinds of judgments are no longer fair ones which society can make. Your appearance is naturally going to become worse over time, and by and large society recognizes it. So note, when we make determinations about people, the kinds of determinations we make on appearance are almost always much worse for those individuals who are young than those individuals who are old. Why is that such a tragedy? It is first a tragedy for each and every single one of those individuals who find themselves not being taken seriously if they don't conform to certain levels of social expectations. Something which isn't as true when you get older. This is particularly true in the case of women, where, for instance, when they become older, they are often taken more seriously for their other characteristics, rather than just considered almost purely based on their appearance. At the point where you delay the aging process, you mean you never allow that shift from certain kinds of things to be considered valuable to other things being considered to be valuable. We think that harms humanity and human life overall. Go ahead, Tom.
Your premise for this argument is incorrect. When you grow older, you're still judged within your peer group, which is why women go out of their way to seek Botox and other treatments. You're still compared to people your age.
Absolutely. To some degree, you are still going to be judged under, at any age. The question isn't whether you're going to be judged. The question is whether that is the major factor which is being used to judge you. As James tells you, that deteriorates over time because you just can't look as beautiful or you can't look as good when you get older. Second, let's talk about the value of human life. What we hear from the previous speaker is a set of reasons why it's terrible if your life ends early. The reason he gives you is some people still really enjoy going to debating competitions, but his reasoning was that you put time and effort into it. But time and effort are no longer meaningful when you have next to unlimited time, and when you have next to unlimited time, it's the very act of limiting it which gives value, the very act of sacrifice which is in itself important. What are the other reasons why we believe that individuals lose out? First, because the once-in-a-lifetime aspects opening government tell you that, for instance, once you have to do things again and again and again, or you do things multiple times, each of those experiences means less. Look at the examples James gives you, the examples of being jaded when it comes to hearing a piece of music again and again. That's when those experiences mean less. Secondly, as opening government say we never hear a response to, you often don't make those choices which are good for you. This is particularly important when, for instance, you decide never to switch jobs because you can just do that later. And that's what's often harmful to the experiences which you have in your life overall. Finally, because there is no sacrifice, often your choices just don't mean as much. I agree with opening opposition that it is damaging when you ultimately make choices which aren't good for you. But by the same token, when you make choices which are good and lead to good outcomes, part of it is you realize you did that and that's something which is beneficial to you. The reason you see that to be beneficial is because the choice which you made earlier, which did have costs and one which you made correctly, that I think is best to watch. So let's finally talk about the macroeconomic implications of this, or what this means for society overall. The first thing I want to point out is we do think overpopulation presumably becomes a problem. The only justification for why it is, well, to some degree, people won't want to continuously have kids. That's firstly because the conception opening opposition gives you that children are simply about living a legacy. I, by and large, don't think that's true. I think plenty of people enjoy having children themselves. Closing opposition say, well, but you enjoy it less because children take a huge amount of huge investment in, so the marginal value isn't so high. I'm happy to say the marginal value will decrease, but by and large, all people are going to do is maybe wait another 20 years and have children many, many years apart, because that's where they can get values having a baby for 5 years and another 5 years. So they then want to give you reasons why this won't be damaging. So opening government tell you about water, they tell you about food, they tell you about space. Then the response is, that can be solved. I'm entirely unclear why that can be solved. They say maybe we'll change evil EU and US policy. I don't know why you would do that. I think it's probably more likely you have a perpetuation of those policies to protect your larger population and continue the harms to those individuals. I don't understand what the solvency mechanism other than a belief that these problems will be solved, which either team on the opposition gives you. At the end of this debate, the question is human life better? Are your experiences better? Do you value life more? Your life definitely lasts longer, but those experiences aren't as good. Your appearance matters much more, which is harmful to you. There's something which is incredibly demeaning to a large group of people. You still have problems with overpopulation, and the resource constraints were very happy to oppose.
I thank the government whip for his speech, and to close the case for the opposition in the debate as a whole, the House recognises the opposition whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The biggest problem with government in this round, I think, is their assertion of what gives you meaning in life. The problem in this debate generally has been counter-assertions about perhaps the knowledge of death gives you meaning, and perhaps the knowledge of immortality gives you meaning. On closing opposition, our stance is simple, that what truly gives meaning to people is a decision best left up to people outside of external domination and constraints by people, and that these constraints and domination are no less harmful if placed on you by nature than if placed on you by other human beings. That's the account of human freedom that I think is most compelling. I want to talk about that in addition to two main themes in this round. I want to talk about, I'm termed this practicalities of the round, basically, stuff about people dying of starvation, stuff about promotion incentives. I want to talk about the social impacts of this resolution, and I want to talk about human freedom in general, and which side best promotes a meaningful human life. All right, let's talk about the practicalities associated with this debate. Firstly, the idea of no one wanting to work because you can never get promoted. Number of problems with this. Firstly, I thought according to Gov's logic that bosses were supposed to be stifled by inertia and not have a motivation to hold on to their jobs for thousands of years. Just an interesting observation. Two more responses. Look, lots of different businesses will exist at the point where you have a larger base to cater to. At that point, I don't think people are tied to one particular type of job in the way that they would suggest not being able to move up one company's ladder is harmful. I think the existence of many companies and an increased amount of time to reorient your education to fit into other companies will solve for this. Thirdly, I think notions of seniority change at the point where the marginal benefit of 200 years of experience versus 100 years of experience are no longer seen as importantly. I think this gives merit a far greater chance to shine. Malthus. Why was Malthus wrong? Number of reasons. Firstly, people are going to have less kids. Again, lots of assertions. Why do people have kids? We can concede that there are multiple motivations for having kids and still argue that removing one of those main motivations will lead to less kids. And that's one of the reasons you see, and not the population increase they're talking about. More importantly, the social expectation to have kids largely stems from our mortality and our reason to leave legacies. I think that's where the social expectation comes from, regardless of individual motivations. Technology largely solves this problem. It solved it. It proved Malthus wrong. It's proved various accounts of overpopulation wrong. I think not only do our current crop of scientists have a good chance of solving this, that the ability to have people of exceptional talent live longer lives increases the incentive for it to be solved. I also think that actual solutions that Fenner talks about, like fixing economic policy, are a better way to fix this. We've been moral for a while now, I'd say, and I don't think the problems they've talked about have gone away in that regard. I think our policy is far more likely to solve it. Social impacts. Social values, the first big thing we heard in this round. I think there's things Fenner tells that are important here. Firstly, that the reason people are adverse to change is they find the presence of certain other people in society unusual and jarring. And longer lives spent with these people increases your chances of having positive interactions with these people, increases your chances of seeing situations where these people have merit, as opposed to the unique set of circumstances you may live in a 50-year life. I think it increases the chances that you improve your circumstances in that regard. Secondly, a reason people have entrenched views is a mentality of a finished life. A mentality that the last 30 years of your life don't have the same meaning because death is inevitable. I think this makes you less likely to reorient your ideology. This is why often, technologically speaking, we see older people less willing to adapt. I think social motivations work on a similar basis as well. People are more likely to evolve. And that's more. Thirdly, I don't even think demographics correlate with support for this. Look at the massive increase in support for gay marriage in the United States over the last 5 years, 3 years, 1 year, where we haven't seen massive demographic shifts. People and inspirational figures and inspirational movements can actually change minds. That's the way these movements gain premises. Secondly, geniuses. I think that great people are the product of unique conditions and natural talents, and a conflation of those two that is not repeated generation to generation. I want to preserve those conditions that are so rare. We want to preserve those conditions that allow people to reach the heights of exceptionality. Our case lets you stay that. I think that's important as well. No thank you. Also, I think Fenner correctly tells you the way you get traction in the fields like academics is taking down the views of established scientists. Merely repeating what Newton said is not going to gain you much notice as an academic, but a refutation of his theory will, and the ability for him then to respond leads to more vibrant debate academically that benefits as well, and that's important. Okay, second opposition talks about discrimination. There are at least 4 things that are wrong with this. Firstly, the main expectation that is wrong is the expectation of the preservation of beauty, not just the expectation of beauty as a static thing. Women go to the types of things they're talking about, like Botox, like breast surgeries, because they're expected to stay young. They're expected to stay beautiful. That's where discrimination comes in. Secondly, ageism is a thing. It's not like when you're old, you're free from discrimination, right? I'm going to give you 3 examples. One being their notion that the life of a 12-year-old, the death of a 12-year-old, is more tragic than the death of an 85-year-old. It's that type of attitude that old people have to face, right? That their lives have lost value, they're no longer important. They face those discriminations a long period of time. The idea that they're inflexible, they're bad drivers, as like a general example, you face lots of discrimination as an old person, right? This is not unique to this. And I actually think, lastly, notions of discrimination have shifted, meaning that it is possible in their world that we shift the basis on which we discriminate on people to still have some comparative basis of beauty. Closing.
Okay, I mean, obviously you can still have discrimination against the old, this is comparative. But secondly, could you explain how you end up with that shift, or just going to assert that it exists?
Right, firstly, yes, it is comparative. We've done a much better job, as I just did. Secondly, absolutely, the shift will happen because people generally discriminate on a basis to make themselves feel more secure, right? And there's always going to be power imbalances. The basis of these will shift. Moreover, the current bases aren't even entirely solved, I don't think, by their policy, or even substantially. Human freedom. 2 things we've heard from that side of the house. The knowledge of death spurs us to action, and second, opposite government's notion that the knowledge of death gives us meaning. Responses to each of these. Opening government's idea that spurs us to action. Firstly, I just say lots of people hate idle existences, right? Like the notion of just living a life that is short of meaning and not doing anything doesn't appeal to a lot of people. Secondly, material conditions can still be better or worse in a life that doesn't have a finite end, which means you have an incentive to create a good life for yourself, which often requires you to put in effort. But thirdly, they don't deal with the psychological harms of death. And this is where I think the thing Spanner tells you are very important. That firstly, it's a relational concept of comparing the life you used to live when you were young to the decaying person you become when you're 90. Secondly, it's the idea of contemplating death, right? It's the idea that when you have a fixed date, you know you're going to die, and the idea that death will soon claim you, contemplating death is psychologically harmful. But fourthly, this doesn't engage with the morality of death. If this resolution had been, you are an actor who knows that every single person in the world will be murdered by another person at some point in their lives, would you stop it? Probably would. I don't think it's different if nature is the person doing the murdering as opposed to other human beings. You can't hold nature to account, but this policy lets you stop the problems that it creates. It gives us meaning. Firstly, meaning comes from sacrifice, from effort, from time you put into things. I don't know why sacrifice is reduced. I can still put in a lot of effort and hard work into doing things that gives me meaning. Secondly, my depth of understanding of issues improves. I may be jaded listening to the same song over and over again, but under our world, I can listen not only to lots of different music, but all the music that is produced for generations after me, meaning I have more options and avenues to gain meaning. And thirdly, I think the biggest constraints on our freedom and our meaning is that we are able to independently create meaning in ways that no one in this room can decide. Our side removes the biological and social constraints for that and truly empowers freedom. On those grounds, we oppose.